It is currently in the process of being printed in South Korea, but in an area where apparently there is no virus, and they just sent a photograph of the outside covers, it being two-volume hardcover book in very dark wisdom blue in a slipcover, and they sent us the photo of the slipcover and the outside covers. So it's moving forward, but it was a 6-week printing process, and we're just hoping for it arrives on time for the launch on the 24th of March at the Great Stupa. Rinpoche has expressed I don't know if it's come through to Tara Institute, I don't quite know what comes through to Tara Institute, but I know that Peter Stickles, the FPMTA, was instructed to tell every centre that Rinpoche wanted as many people connected with FPMTA to be present at that launch as possible. Now it's a big ask, and none of my family are going. They think it's all very weird, And I said, look, it's not a book launch. There's no wine and food. They went, ugh, I said it'll be, a couple of speeches and then bang back into the retreat. They went, ugh. I said, yeah, that's right. Don't come. I never call it my book, and I will not sign copies of this book. It is inappropriate. It's a much bigger book than me. My other work was often under pseudonym, which I much prefer, because name in print is a Class A drug. It sends people mad. This book would not exist without Peter Kedge. He was an aeronautical engineer at Rolls-Royce, an Englishman. He recalls standing on the line one day thinking there must be more to life than engines and talking about sport. Peter was a founding member of the first board of FPMT and spent many years as a monk. At Lama's request, he went into business in Hong Kong, where he established what became the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, the publisher of this book. Peter set up a warehousing business he sold to Dexion, a Fortune 500 company, and stayed with them for 17 years. He paid off so much FPMT debt, you have no idea. He spent the next 19 years running the Maitreya project, which is now in severe difficulties in Kashinagar. Peter paid for years of travel as I flew around the world interviewing hundreds of Lama's students. Only 2 people refused to be interviewed. The others were so generous as they gave private and often painful stories. I'm a trained journalist. I hid their names, I hid their genders, I hid their nationalities. People were not exposed. People were not made vulnerable in print. I know how to get past all of that. Peter, his wife and their son now live in a trailer park in Canada. So let's say that his reward is in a future life. Nick Rebush, the publisher, was ordained in 1974 and was the first person to publish the Lama's teachings, the wish-fulfilling Golden Sun, and the course notes. The course notes look like this. And I was involved in actually setting up this book too. In London, he published more books, and when Peter Kedge sent his massive archive of tapes to Boston, Nick took Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive to the next level. He has since published and distributed close to 1 million free books of the Lama's teachings. Nick also has possibly the best corporate memory in FPMT, and no one else would have gone to such incredible lengths to collect photos and set this book up. Lama Yeshe did not fit the Sarah J. traditional Geshe model. He said he realised emptiness in the debating court at Sarah, and from then on he hid from social chatter and pretended to be asleep. He locked his door. At Buxa, the refugee camp, he did the same. He hid from people. He was not available. And he got a tiny hut as far away from the crowd as he could get. Lama was totally renounced, and no one lived more simply. Then he met the Yinjis and was not upset when he no longer had time to actually take his Geshe exams, he said, "Anyway, Geshe Yeshe sounds ridiculous." He wore unorthodox robes, a fuchsia-coloured fringed zen, when it's supposed to be a maroon and a rolled hem, and sleeveless sort of parka tops. He said, "Oh, these zens," he said, "it's a bit old-fashioned, isn't it?" You know. But he was also, in other ways, extremely conservative and orthodox. But all of this was pretty shocking to some in the very conservative Tibetan monastic community because Lama was very different. However, His Holiness, Trijang Rinpoche, Ling Rinpoche, Serkong Rinpoche, Geshe Rabden, all the biggest lamas cheered him at every turn. Now, when I was in Boston travelling around, I had the pleasure of meeting Lodi Gyari Rinpoche, who was then His Holiness's special envoy to the United States, who often met with Lama Yeshe in Dharamsala. I said, "Talk to me about what you think of Lama Yeshe." And he said, "Our meetings were never prolonged. I think when you live in the same period as persons like Lama Yeshe, you don't really see the dimensions of their contributions at the time. Lama Yeshe was a Dharma pioneer in the West. I believe such lamas were born at this particular time for just that mission. Kalu Rinpoche, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe, they were the ones who took the risks and who helped lay a formidable foundation in the West for the Tibetan struggle. Lama Tsongkhapa can be seen as the exponent of a new school of Buddhism, while the lamas and masters who took Buddhism to the West are more in the category of the great translators who hold a very special place in the Tibetan Buddhist hierarchy. They were sent by the Tibetan people to India to learn Sanskrit so they could translate the teachings. In this way they can be recognised as the givers of the Dharma." Lodi Gyari continued, "If we were living in the time of Padmasambhava, we might not have seen the problems existing then and therefore the role of such people. But now, when you look back, you can see that people like the great Lama Atisha, who brought Buddhism from one culture to the other, their lives have become almost important as Padmasambhavas. Lamas like Lama Yeshe fall into this category. So when we look back, people like him will appear much bigger on the horizon than they do now. In my opinion, Western Tibetan Buddhism will ultimately have its own character, just as Buddhism coming from India, Tibet, eventually established its own character. In 50 years' time or so, I think we will find not just one particular standardised form of Western Buddhism. I'm sure a unique character will emerge when that takes a really solid foundation, when the Western Sangha has its own character and language, and then the lineage of that." John Landau is, I think, the best writer that FPMT's got. John Landau lives in California and he was one of the early students, and he wrote the introduction to this book. And he wrote something like this, I've abbreviated slightly. "At the same time the Tibetans turned up, young Western nomads, most with college educations. Tibetan Buddhism is a very middle-class experience and we greatly lack tradies. It's very obvious. Were rushing to the east looking for meaning. Disillusioned by the false promises of material progress, disturbed by the cynical politics of the Vietnam War, spiritually unsatisfied by the offerings of the religious traditions they knew, they made the Journey to the East, which was the title of a popular book by the Nobel laureate Hermann Hesse, who also wrote Siddhartha and a number of other books, The Glass Bead Game and many others, which were turning people's heads at that time. This is another book that was very important at the time. Alan Watts, The book on the taboo against knowing who you are. This was in everyone's luggage, which was printed in first printed in 1966. The quest for enlightenment was spurred on by Lobsang Rampa, the third eye, Carlos Castaneda, the teaching of Don Juan, which mentioned the use of peyote as a transforming psychedelic experience for people, not a party drug. Psychedelics offered an instant window into a bigger world than the one they knew. But once they saw it, they kind of knew the mundane world was not what they thought it was. As we used to say at the time, God so loved the world, he gave it LSD. Be Here Now by Baba Ramdas. This book that was written like many different styles. Formerly Richard Alpert was a Harvard professor. He was not a hippie. He experimented with LSD with Timothy Leary, who coined the phrase turn on, tune in, drop out. The Beatles got involved with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. While the Indians and Nepalis were acquiring Western goods, the Westerners were consuming the many psychedelics freely available. They were in Kathmandu, after all, and hash was legal in Nepal. LSD was a sacrament. It was not a party drug. It was not about getting out of it, but into it. Over the years, LSD changed and became much weaker. If you can follow the joke, we could say that someone left that cake out in the rain. If you can't, well, congratulations on your youth. The middle-class hippies gravitated naturally to the spiritual riches the Tibetans had to offer. When Lama Yeshe came back from his first trip to the States in 1974, he said, "The Dharma is an American bed. Everyone can fit in." And Lama made sure they realised there was room for them. Sometimes now people go, "No, no, no." Lama said, "Yes, yes, yes." Let's start with sex. Drugs are for some, but sex is for everyone, because without sex, none of us would be here. Back then, the contraceptive pill had just come out. This was a turning point for sexual liberalism at the time. There'd always been people playing around, but they used to hide it. Now they were out there and showing it off. Free sex and free love was all good. The hippie view of the time was that free sex was essentially liberating. The hippie view of the time, this is from the book, that free sex was essentially liberating, didn't wash with Lama Yeshe. Were animals liberated by free sex? The act, he said, was only transformed by an altruistic mind in which one's primary concern is for the happiness of others rather than the desire to achieve a brief physical relief. As a result of this sexual revolution, there were an enormous number of unwanted pregnancies and abortions. All the women who rushed to Lama Yeshe in tears, hearing about the perfect human rebirth, hearing about karma, bursting into saying, "Lama, I've had an abortion." "Yes, dear, I understand, dear. People whom you wouldn't believe have had abortions." They told me, they were very kind to say that. So many had abortions. Lama used to say, "Everything can be purified. There is nothing that cannot be purified." And the cure for an abortion was a 3-month Vajrasattva retreat at Dharamsala. Fix you, no worries. Sex. For many it was about being liked, not about sex. People wanted to be liked, and the currency of the time was to have sex, to show that you liked each other. It was very random. But and as the Tantric sex texts say, in the truth body there is neither love nor hate. And when you look at love and hate in a sexual context, you end up with rape and domestic violence, where violence against women is a mixture of desire and hate. And there's a lovely story of Lama talking about this, and a girl coming up to him and saying, "Oh, Lama, I don't hate anyone." One of the pioneers, "I don't hate anyone." He said, "Do you love anyone in particular?" "Oh, yes, Lama." "Then you hate." Because love and hate are extremes of the same problem. People are sexually in an individual way, and there is sexual immaturity on both sides. And the sexual immaturity in old men is a very sad thing to experience and witness. And I had a friend who worked in a big aged care unit where old men would sometimes get into they were clearly sexually problematic and would do all sorts of things to get their genitals touched. Make a terrible mess to get their genitals touched and cause a lot of social problems. And what she did with them, this woman, who happened to be George Pell's niece, can you believe it? She used to send them down to the Daily Planet brothel. And she'd rang up the brothel, and she knew very well, because she was a very experienced manager of very big nursing homes. And she said they knew this syndrome. And they said, yes, yes, and they have a special group of older women who are usually ex-nurses who deal with these men. They don't have to deal with much, frankly. But not much happens. But the guys, they take them individually, they take their clothes off, they put them in the shower, they give them a glass of champagne, tickle them up, tell them they're wonderful, have a spa bath with them, tell them they're marvellous, dry them off, powder them, dress them up, and send them home with a pocket full of Menties. And they're right for months. So sexual immaturity is an unfortunate thing, it's a really unfortunate thing. And some people who can't talk about sex without shrieking or going off or sort of being shocked, It's very sad. Sex is also about ownership. If one partner goes with the other, sometimes the other person kills themselves. A bodhisattva would say, "Oh, he makes you happier? How wonderful. You go with him." In class one Sunday, this is from the book, in class one Sunday, Lama said that sex was dirty. Zena, who was a very sexually experienced woman, cornered him afterwards and told him he shouldn't say that. "Oh, yes," he said. The following week, the talk was all about sex being dirty and ugly, unless it was done with the compassionate bodhisattva attitude. Zena had married twice, had a child to a married man, and was moving beyond sex. Sister Max Matthews, the black nun, who really just built Copan, was very sexy and had been having sex since she was around 11 by her own choice. She was just full of sex, but she never took drugs and knew nothing about them. She said that she would see that Lama Yeshe would hold women's hands and touch them, but he never touched her. Not for many, many years, because she was so full of sexual vibrations. When she finally got over that, he touched her hand and looked at her and she, "Yes, now you can handle yourself." One student put it to Lama Yeshe that if the perfect human rebirth was so precious and rare, then surely contraception was to be deplored. Lama replied that while contraception was not a problem, people should check up before indulging in sex in order to ensure that they were motivated by something a little higher than base desire. Lama told one student that at the moment of orgasm, one should dedicate that moment and herself entirely to the benefit of others, that was the point of orgasm. Lama said that without doing this, there was no way that sex could be anything other than self-indulgent. Of course, the sexual stories we got were tended to be the problematic ones because the other people didn't go, But one young girl inquired if being a lesbian was okay. Could she still practice Dharma? "Oh, that's no problem," he replied. "It's just samsara. Whether you are the same sex or different, the suffering is still the same." One day he said to her, "I heard sex with women is better than sex with men. I have heard that women can have sex with each other 20 times a night, but men are finished after 3 or 4 times. So women have much more fun, don't they, dear?" Nothing fazed Lama. Everyone walked away feeling confident and loved and secured rather than outcast and dirty and wrong, which their family and so many people were telling them. Fun in sex was not a Christian view, particularly not a Catholic view. The Jews, which I've now been with 20 years, the religious Jews have a very different attitude to sex than the Christian tradition. Very different. It's about fun, and it's about the man's job is to make sure the woman has more fun than they do. And they can only do it 2 weeks in the month. And before they do it, they go to the mikvah, the religious bath, where they strip off every single thing, all jewellery, no things, nothing like that, and go into this very carefully blessed water. That's a lot of rules about how this water works. And go under the water and come up, and as they come up, they read this prayer on the wall, and it says, "May my husband look at my body and see that I am dedicated to him and that my body is dedicated to him. When I look at my husband, may I see his body and be dedicated to him. May no other thought arise for us that other to give pleasure and take care of each other's bodies." It's an incredible prayer. The German Buddhists included quite a group of lesbians who even sat together at one table in the dining room. We're the lesbians. At question time, someone asked Lama Yeshe if lesbian activity was an unwholesome action. "What?" said Lama. "I never heard that. If you have a relationship, you can help each other grow. That's the main point. Otherwise, why have one?" Oh, Adele Bunko was with Lama a long time. He was very gay. The first time I told Lama about my homosexuality was at Grizzly Lodge in California. I said I had such problems with it, but he said, "Don't listen to society. They are so stupid. Maybe it's better because then two people really know each other." Lama was very interested in my homosexual relations with my boyfriend and asked me for details. He asked me to get some gay porn movies from the local video store because they were staying together, but they didn't have gay ones. Lama said, "OK, take another one." So I brought home some different porn movies and we watched them. He did it for me so I could realise something. Because there is nothing more boring than watching the sexual act over and over and over. It was rare that there was anything in these movies in which you could actually think you were excited by what you saw. That summer we went to the gay parade in San Francisco. Lama was completely dressed in Western clothes with a maroon peaked shade cap. Afterwards he told me he thought the men looked better than the women. And here's a bit that you might freak you out a bit. In the Lam Rim it says to counter extreme attachment to a person, visualise them taking the skin off and looking at their innards, their guts, their intestines full of excreta, and get beyond the outer appearance. There was an incredible guy called Stefano, a real Latin lover. He was a total druggie and he died of it. He prayed to die before Rinpoche and he did. But the Lamas loved Stefano. Stefano would arrive at teachings out of it, crash out in the front row, all the people in the front row, and Stefano, and people would go, "Oh, isn't he terrible?" And then Stefano would ask a question that would blow everyone out of the water. Anyway, Stefano became a monk and disrobed, and, monks don't disrobe because they want to kill someone. I just have to go out and break my vow by killing someone. And as the Tibetans said, it was difficult for Western monks because they're surrounded by women in a way that the Tibetan monks are not, and that women behave with them in a way that around Tibetan they nuns. So it's a completely different environment. So anyway, Stefano disrobed and Lama called him out. "Okay, talk to you, sit down here." Stefano was not one to get embarrassed. He told me that after he'd disrobed, Lama called him in and said, "Okay, I want you to describe everything. What it feels like when the penis first goes in the vagina, what it feels at the next stage, and the next, what it feels like to touch the woman, to be touched there, and happened there? I want to know. I want every detail, dear. Stefano said it did get a bit uncomfortable. Lama wanted Stefano to see the experience in a more detached light, but also he wanted to know everything there was to learn about our Western lives. I heard in Los Angeles he wanted to go to nightclubs on Sunset Strip, but no one would let him. You know, that story is so significant because once an old friend of mine who was married to a very uptight kind of a woman, and he told me, he says, oh, look, there's this woman at work, you know, I'm getting really close to her and I got to do it. And I said, you're risking so much. He said, yeah, I got to do it. And he said, you're risking so much. For how long will this experience last? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? And I said, what about this? And then I went through the Stefano thing and he went, oh, God. Oh, you've killed it. Oh, God, you've killed me. I can't do it. And I said, good. Because you're about to throw away 20 years and a house and family and all this stuff for what? How long? And he goes, oh, you finished me. So that was amazing that's just, you never know. Sometimes people came to Lama with such sex issues, he said to them, dear, I'm a monk. I do not know about these things. Maybe you should see a doctor. Lama Tsongkhapa Institute, Lama gave a teaching about sex. He said, these days, one of the main reasons that a man and woman become friends is sexual. They get together for sexual pleasure. In earlier times, marriage had a divine quality. A couple came together out of respect with the aim of creating a kind of totality. That gave meaning to getting married, and marriages made with such purpose became good ones. Like I have to say, the Jewish shidduch, the arranged marriage, it works. There aren't divorces from shidduchim. Many of today's marriages become disastrous because they lack purpose. There's no worthwhile goal for coming together. A couple should not come together out of grasping at each other. There should be more meaning to it than that. But our craving desire and lack of wisdom work together to create an extreme situation that finishes up causing conflict. The woman agitates her man, the man agitates his woman. In either case, it ends in goodbye. These days, I travel the entire world, and many young people come to see me to discuss their relationship problems. But they all boil down to people's coming together out of the wrong motivation. Whether you're a man or a woman, it's important that there's not too much grasping in your relationship, that you don't agitate your partner. Extreme grasping at sexual pleasure is a problem. Sexual pleasure is an irritant. You can see. However, many couples aren't together for sex. Their relationship is deeper than that, so their attitude is different. They are very comfortable, but somehow with no tremendous expectations of each other. Therefore, they have a good relationship. I'm sure you can see such examples, when there's not so much grasping. In my limited experience of the Western world, many Christians who believe in God have very respectful marriages. They believe in something deeper than themselves and are not living for sense pleasure alone. I would say that such couples have been blessed by God or Jesus. In the King of Prayers, one prays not to become a householder. Lama said he thought the worst thing about being married was that you have to share a bed with someone every night. He would be pleased, I think, to find that marriages, after they've gone on for 40 years or so, all the ones I know, they have separate beds, separate rooms. When Lama first taught in California, every woman who came to see him burst into tears. Later in the course, he said he was going to run a special course called Women's Liberation. The semantics were wrong for the time, and the men complained, saying, "What about men's liberation?" Point was, everyone was pretty unhappy. Another time, he said in France, "You Westerners, you get married for suffering. You get married with the idea, you make me happy, so let's get married." So when the person you married to starts to change, as they always do, it's, "Oh, you don't give me chocolate anymore. I don't love you. You don't make me happy." This is putting blame for your own inner state of mind on someone else. It can't work. So you really get back the suffering. You're programmed for suffering. If, however, you get married with the understanding that I'm responsible for my happiness, you are responsible for your happiness, so what can I do to help you? Then you will always be happy. You will always have peace of mind. You will have a basis for happiness. Lama had the true tantric personality, enjoyment. His laughter, his glorious smile, his incredible warmth gave so much pleasure. Lama did not accumulate personal possessions apart from the occasional fine china cup and saucer, which he gave away. Once he came back from overseas with an empty suitcase, having given everything away. So we've just got time to talk about a few drugs. 1967, drugs had long been a part of Zena Rashevsky's life. She took LSD with Timothy Leary and marijuana was a staple. Rinpoche has said, I don't know which came first for the Ingis, LSD or The Way of the White Clouds, which was this book by Lama Anagarika Govinda. Once when Zena was going out to buy marijuana in Darjeeling, Lama Yeshe confronted her and said he did not want her to use drugs. It was clear he knew all the time. 1969, from the book. Kathmandu was heaven on earth to the emerging, politically aware, alternative generation. It was the time, quote, it was the time of the LSD explosion, the Buddha grass explosion, as Zopa Rinpoche put it later, referring to a type of marijuana. One day, a well-known acid guru, as they were called, turned up at Kopan for lunch and challenged the Lamas, saying, I don't think you people are as highly realised as people think you are. Lama Yeshe folded his hands, bowed and replied, yes, dear, you are right. Humbled, the acid guru offered them some of his best. The Lamas declined politely. Higher mental states was a favourite topic in Lama Yeshe's Sunday talks. Students often insisted they had experienced just such states while on drugs. Well, I don't know about that, Lama Yeshe answered. I never took drugs. But with my way, you'll never come down. The Lama Yeshe's first 1970 teachings were published in 1972. That was his first book, and a book called The Diamond Light of the Eastern Dawn by Jan Willis, who's now a professor in America. In 1970, there was a yoga conference in Delhi and the Lamas went to it straight after the first ordination. Afterwards, some journalists asked if he would answer questions. Of course, dear. What do you think of hippies taking drugs and then asking for Buddhist teachings, they asked. Lama Yeshe said he didn't see anything wrong with it, that perhaps mind-expanding drugs opened doors for these people or even led them to investigate their minds. It was a controversial view that upset some of those present who translated his message as, this Lama tells us it's okay to take drugs. But Lama Yeshe didn't mind. He said just what he thought and attracted a number of new Western students in the process. There's a terrible story. There was a very strict Zen monk at Kopan who was doing walking meditation with people, and a couple of the young Californian girls spiked his tea, didn't they? And they were out walking, and suddenly this monk is leaping from behind. I've got it, it's happened, it's happened, it's happened, it's happened, and flying around. And he believed he was enlightened. He believed, I can see it all, I can see it all, it all makes sense, I've got there, I'm there, it's happened, it's happened, it's happened. And anyway, the Lama realised what had happened and had to take the monk down and bring him down and say, come and spend some time with me, dear, until it's over, you know. A question. It seems that to achieve the desired result from meditation, you need a certain kind of environment. What are the implications of this fact for those of us who live in a concrete, noisy, 9-to-5 world with little or no contact with others interested in the spiritual path? Do you believe that psychedelics like LSD can be important or useful for people like that? Lama Yeshe. Well, it's hard to say. I've never taken anything like that. But Buddhist teachings do talk about how material substances affect the human nervous system and the relationship between the nervous system and the mind. We study this kind of thing in Buddhist philosophy. From what I've learned, I would say that taking drugs goes against what Buddhism recommends. However, my own point of view is that people who are completely preoccupied with the sense world, with no idea of the possibilities of mental development, can possibly benefit from the drug experience. How? If people whose reality is limited to the meat and bone of this human body have this emptiness, have this experience, perhaps they'll think, wow, I thought this physical world was all there is, but now I can see that it's possible for my mind to develop beyond the constraints of my flesh and blood body. In some cases, the drug experience can open up a person's mind to the possibility of mental development. But once you've had that experience, it's wrong to keep taking hallucinogens because the drug experience is not real understanding. It's not a proper realisation. The mind is still limited because matter itself is so limited. It's up and down, up and down. Also, if you take too many drugs, you can damage your brain. So that's just my personal point of view. And that's from Silent Mind, Holy Mind, which is one of the early books, and which actually has my hippie address in South Europe in the imprint, because we did that book out of this, anyway, publishing history. As the hippies always said, with LSD and the drugs, when you get the message, hang up the phone. There was a German architect at my course. He was a very famous German architect, and there was a wildness about him. And when he spoke, he didn't speak out of the text. He didn't speak out of the lectures. He spoke out of his heart. He spoke in a very, very fresh, open way. And every time he opened his mouth, he went, oh, he's going to say, it's this guy, oh, he's worth listening to. You could see he was someone alive. Anyway, he got up one day to talk about LSD. And he was wearing this jacket with a little sort of funny pocket. And he said, in this pocket here, I always keep a tab of acid. Always. He said, when I first took LSD, I had a very successful architecture practice, but, I'm German, and it was sort of rigid and, they're mathematical and da-da-da-da-da. Then I took acid, and the effect it had on me was to do with shapes. And all the shapes and all the maths that I knew changed in my head. And I suddenly saw new shapes and new ways of handling maths and new ways of framing things, and my whole practice changed, and I became incredibly successful. And people just loved what I do, and they could relate to what I do, and it was huge. And I thought, wow, this is good. So after a few years, I took another one. Again, the whole thing, all the shapes flew up in the air, and there was even more complexities and more things, and I worked with that for a few years. And like that, I worked out through that pattern, then I thought, maybe I'll take another. And I thought, hang on. You started with rigid shapes, you ended up with more fluid shapes, more complex shapes. Then you went to even more fluid, more complex shapes. If you keep going in that direction, you're going to end up throwing up sand. So I keep this tab here because I've yet to see any reason to take it. But it was an old friend, so I just keep it here, and customs have never found it. He was wild. At La Trobe University in Melbourne in March 1975, Lama said, the polluted mind that makes people take drugs is the issue, not the drugs. Instead of looking at that, we make a big fuss about the physical drugs. One person went to Lama and confessed to smoking marijuana. Do you enjoy it? Lama asked. Yes, said the person. So, what's the problem? The person went, what? What did he say? Another person went to Lama and confessed to smoking marijuana. Don't you ever do that again. You stop right now. Another person went to Lama and confessed to smoking marijuana. Do you fall over backwards? No, Lama. Oh, well, that's all right then. Everything was different. And the bottom line came down to Lama's favourite word, you check up. Don't swallow the teachings whole, as they say, like a dog eats meat. Don't recite the words of the teachings. Don't recite the word of the prayers like a monkey. Check up until it means something to you individually, so that you own it in your guts. Check up, check up, check up. Do not recite. Just check up. You owe it to yourself to check up, to chew it, and find out what works for you. And don't necessarily talk to others. They'll tell you what they think, and that you ought to think what they think. Check up individually, privately, seriously, forever, everything. Alcohol. Lama had dinner with Chogyam Trungpa one night with a whole lot of people from, what was it called, this foundation? And had one sip of wine. The alcohol flew at Chogyam Trungpa's place. and had one sip. Another time at Lama Tsongkhapa, the father of an Italian student brought along a very special bottle of his own wine. And Lama said, "Oh, I brought you some of my very special wine," because Italians wine, yes, it was like water, you have to drink. Yeah. The priest all drank, everyone drank wine. And Lama had, again, a tiny sip. They're the only two instances I could find of Lama consuming a drop of alcohol. He used to say that students could have a glass of wine with their families with a family celebration, but not 4 or 5. Check up. Another thing was when people said, Lama said. Lama said was often Lama said became a point-scoring mechanism, a way of not thinking. Lama was always saying check up because he was always telling us that we had perfect inner wisdom. So our checking up was worthwhile because if we looked to the place of our inner wisdom, we would trust it, we would find it. We didn't have to depend on what others said. We would find that fountain of inner wisdom that is with us all the time. And some people just rush to Lama for every question. Once he said, pretty soon they'll be asking me how many sheets of toilet paper to use. Sex and drugs are primitive addictions. The dangerous addictions are to authority and power. There's no limit on that. But sitting at the top table will not get you enlightened. They say power and authority does not change a person, rather it reveals a person. I was in the journalism for so long, I met so many people, and I saw the disease of government ministers and the white car. The rich people have shiny black cars. Government ministers get the white car. The one thing they cling to is that white car. They're going to lose the white car. When I was in positions of power and authority as a journalist, they suck up to you like you wouldn't believe because they're getting their name in print, Class A drug. I can tell you the very best thing about power and authority is that they save you a parking spot. Money is a mixed thing because there's so much dirty money, and besides, many rich people really believe they're poor, and no amount is enough. They just want more. Okay, we've just got time. This was another famous book that we all looked at the time. The Wheel of Sharp Weapons was a classic. Everyone was reading that. And then we get what wasn't Wisdom Publications. The first of the Lama's books to come out was this one. And now I'm going to take you to the Seed Syllable meditation, which was Lama's answer to finding inner pleasure and getting in touch with what was better than sex, which was the greatest pleasure that most human beings can experience. It started with the 9-point breath meditation. Lama never taught, when they say in breathing meditation, you sit and just watch your breath, it was always the 9-point breathing meditation. So let's do 3 rounds of that, which was orthodox. So that's breathing in through the left nostril, out through the right nostril 3 times, in through the right 3 times, out through the left 3 times, in through both 3 times, and out through both 3 times. All right, don't worry if you haven't finished, you've got the idea. This was very clever, Lama introducing the 9-point breath meditation, because from the word go, from their very first meditation, the students learnt about channels, that the left was different from the right, and the two together was different. This was his introduction to the seed syllable meditation, which comes as part, in Tantra, comes part of a final completion stage practices. Lama wasn't worried about that. He wanted his students, he saw that the Western mind was different to the Tibetan mind. In the Tibetan mind, this, then this, not for anything else. But that mind was different. The influences on the Tibetans were different. The influences on the Westerners were different. The Westerners had enormous complexities. The Tibetans had great simplicity. It was a completely different culture. Lama wanted his students to absolutely be confident of that inner wisdom and the power and strength within them. And that's why he taught the seed syllable meditation. When he introduced it, some of the Geshis who were criticising him for touching women and wearing the wrong robes and things like that says, "That's terrible, he shouldn't be doing that, that's wrong, he shouldn't be doing that." Lama wasn't worried. And he said, "I trust my students," is what he said. He first taught the seed syllable meditation in public in Australia, in Victoria, in Dramana, in April 1975. So it's a special lineage for us. It was first published, that I know of, in the 9th course notes in November 1976. And that was the year Lama told me to become a writer and stuck me in a caravan for a year in the mountain working on a text. And then suddenly he had Jackie Keeley, his secretary, send me this. And he said, seed syllable meditation. Has to be in there. Has to be in the centres. Seed syllable meditation. So I'm going to read it. I don't make things up. I've done too much Holocaust work to make things up. You can't exaggerate or invent or fantasise. You just can't. And in Lama's book, it was astounding. One of the things I found, because George Farley worked out this program where we could put everything together, you know, and there were incredible stories, but we could time and date each piece and look at one event with 20 different voices on one event and line up on the time schedule that event. And there you'd see that some people, quite well-known students, liked to be the one with the story. They were known for having the great story. And when you line it up against the evidence, because you're doing police work, you're doing detective work, you know, those students were making it up, because you could tell. And Rinpoche turned to me and said, no, he didn't. Rinpoche wasn't there. He was in another country. And then so-and-so said, no, they weren't there either. And you thought, And you became very aware of the story, careful with the storytellers. And the mild, meek, invisible people, give me them every time. So we don't make things up, so I'll read it to you so you know I'm not making it up. So just sit there quietly, shut your eyes and listen, and then we'll finish. Relax and be comfortable. Free of expectations but with strong concentration. Visualise the Sushumna, the central channel, as a transparent hollow channel about a finger's breadth in diameter. It runs in front of the spinal column, from the crown chakra at the apex of the skull down to the lower or sex chakra. Also visualise the right and left lateral nadis, slightly thinner than the Sushumna, starting from the right and left nostrils, running up towards the top of the head and then curving to run downwards to the right and left of the Sushumna. The left nadi is blue, the right nadi is red. They join the Sushumna 3 fingers breadth below the navel. If you want to touch that place, you do that. Then visualise the red seed syllable When we talk about the red and white syllables at death, the red seed syllable as a burning hot ember, the size of a sesame seed inside the sushumna at the level of the navel. You can picture that you are actually reaching into a fire, taking out an ember and placing it there. Feel the intense heat of the red hot seed syllable. In order to generate heat from the seed syllable, gently contract the muscles of the pelvic floor, concentrating on the internal rather than the external muscles. And in this way, bring energy up to the seed syllable. Then gently take a full breath through both nostrils. Visualize and feel the air passing through the right and left nadis simultaneously. To strengthen the feeling of the air actually going down the nadis, you can swallow after inhaling. The air energy enters into the sushumna at the point where the two lateral nadis join into it and combines with the energy raised from the pelvic floor. As this breath is being held, push down gently from the area of the navel with your muscles so that a compression is formed around the seed syllable. This compression of energy is formed by the pressure from above pushing down and the combined pelvic energy and inhaled air from below pushing up, and causes the seed syllable to glow even hotter and brighter. While the breath is still being held, you may heighten your experience at the heat at the seed syllable by touching the navel with your hand. This will cause a sensation that can help focus your concentration at the proper point. Hold the breath only as long as it is comfortable to do so. Do not wait until you have to gasp for air. Instead, exhale gently and completely. Although physically the air leaves through the nostrils, visualize that it has risen up through the sushumna, releasing blockages in the chakras. Then immediately tighten the lower muscles. Inhale a second time, feeling the air going down and the compression of energies intensifying the heat of the seed syllable, and exhale. Repeat this process rhythmically, I don't know where I got that from, rhythmically, until 7 consecutive breaths have been taken. The fire of the seed syllable is fanned and the heat intensified progressively with each inhalation. So just do a couple of those. This is something, it's a simple thing. Once you've got the recipe, you can do it any time at home, you can do it anywhere. No one can tell you doing it. It only takes a minute. After the seventh inhalation, when there is a feeling of intense heat at the navel, the now extremely red hot and glowing seed syllable remains at the navel chakra while you strongly visualize and feel its flames blaze up through the sushumna. They rise up to the crown chakra, totally burning away the knots of negative diluted energy that block the sushumna, especially at the heart and throat chakras. This heat rises automatically. When the heat reaches the crown chakra, it melts and releases the pure, white, silver, blissful energy found there. As this silver energy melts, it slowly begins to flow down the now clean and clear sushumna. As this energy is flowing downwards, you should feel an extremely beautiful, blissful sensation at every point it touches, particularly at the throat and heart chakras. When the blissful energy meets with the heat energy of the seed syllable at the navel chakra, the blissful energy suddenly becomes very much more powerful, as when fuel such as kerosene is added to a fire. Brackets. If it is helpful, you can relate this blissful feeling to sexual pleasure. When it reaches the lower chakra, the blissful silver white energy spreads from the sushumna through the many secondary nadis to every pore and atom of the body. The whole body's nervous system is completely filled with the white silver energy. Concentrate on this blissful feeling without expectation, intellectual thoughts, or tension. Relax and experience the blissful feeling. Just let it be. This is transcendental happiness, since, while having such an experience of bliss, you are still maintaining conscious awareness and control, and increasing your wisdom and understanding. In this way, it differs radically from ordinary experiences of bliss, such as sexual pleasure or other sensory enjoyments that are limited and uncontrolled, causing you to become more unaware and ignorant. While concentrating on the blissful feeling, as the mind wanders to various objects of attachment, rather than becoming totally distracted, absorbed in the thought vision of the object of distraction, concentrate on the subject of this thought, that it is the mind that perceives the distracting object. In this way, the distracting thought will disappear. Then return to concentrate on the blissful feeling. This is our unbounded inner potential, our unbounded inner bliss. This meditation was Lama's gift to his students, his gift to FPM2. He wanted everyone to have it. I know people, and I do it myself, when you've got a difficult meeting, or you're meeting someone whom you find difficult, or you've got a bit scared about something, or bit overwhelmed with something, if you do that practice, you can face anything. You can just face it all. It's just clear. The problematic you is no longer there. The blissful inner wisdom you is there instead. Without deities or initiations or prayers or foreign words. It's just what you are. So it's time. I'm sure there are many people taking precepts and want to get an early night because they got up early in the morning. So thank you very much. We dedicate for the people, always remember Lama Yeshe, that all of Lama Yeshe's wishes are realised, all of Rinpoche's wishes are realised, all Geshe Doga's wishes are realised, that all FPMC centres do what they were meant to do, and there was only one purpose for FPMT centres, and that was to serve. To serve. To serve those needing help in every way possible, non-stop. When Lama's first monks and nuns came, they were a bit hoity-toity above it all, and Lama said, "Okay, now, the Sangha are to serve all the meals and do the washing up." You serve. Thank you very much for coming. It's very kind of you. Okay. Any questions? No? Good, thank you.